At dinner, my son said, "Mom, I talked to my wife. We decided to sell your car. You don't need it." I just looked. 10 minutes later, I called my lawyer and planned something that ended their plans. Can you imagine sitting at your own dining table, surrounded by family you've sacrificed everything for, only to hear them casually discussing how to strip away your independence? What would you do if your own child looked you in the eye and told you what you do and don't need in your own life? I remained silent during that dinner, but I already knew that within the next 24 hours, my response would forever change the balance of power in our family. My name is Amelia Rockwell. I'm 63 years old, and until 3 years ago, I was a senior partner at Morrison & Associates, one of the most respected law firms in the city. I spent 40 years building my career, my reputation, and my financial independence. I retired not because I had to, but because I wanted to spend more time with my family. That decision, I now realize, was the beginning of their biggest mistake. The dinner was supposed to be a celebration. My son Michael had just received a promotion at his marketing firm, and his wife Sarah suggested we all get together at my house to commemorate. I had spent the entire afternoon preparing Michael's favorite meal, the same beef Wellington I'd been making for his birthday since he was 12 years old. The dining room was set with my grandmother's china, the candles were lit, and I had even opened a bottle of the expensive wine I'd been saving for special occasions. Michael arrived with Sarah and their 2 children, Emma and James, my precious grandchildren who light up my world every time I see them. Sarah was wearing a new designer dress. I recognized it from the boutique windows downtown, probably worth more than most people's monthly salary. Michael looked confident, almost cocky, as he walked through the door of the house where I had raised him as a single mother after his father abandoned us when he was just 7 years old. We were halfway through the main course when Sarah started the conversation that would change everything. "Amelia," she said, using my first name instead of calling me Mom like she used to. "Michael and I have been talking about your situation." "My situation?" I set down my fork and waited. "We're concerned about you living alone in this big house, driving that car around the city. At your age, these things can become dangerous." I watched my son nod in agreement, and something cold settled in my stomach. This wasn't concern. This was strategy. Michael cleared his throat and delivered the line that would haunt me for days. "Mom, I talked to my wife. We decided to sell your car. You don't need it." The casual way he said it, as if my BMW, the car I had bought with my own money, titled in my own name, was somehow theirs to decide about. "We've already contacted a dealer," Sarah added, cutting into her beef with mechanical precision. "He thinks we can get at least $45,000 for it. That money could be much better invested, don't you think?" Better invested. In what, I wondered? Their next vacation? Sarah's shopping sprees? Michael's gambling problem that he thought I didn't know about? I looked around the table at my family. Emma and James were focused on their food, oblivious to the adult conversation that was essentially planning to clip their grandmother's wings. Michael was avoiding my eyes, probably feeling some residual guilt, but not enough to stop him. Sarah was smiling that practiced smile she used when she wanted something. "And what about my independence?" I asked quietly. "How am I supposed to get around?" Sarah's smile widened. "Oh, we've thought of that too. Michael can drive you to the grocery store once a week, and I'm sure you can arrange rides with friends for other things." "Really, Amelia, how often do you actually need to drive anyway?" That's when I realized what was happening. This wasn't about my safety or their concern. This was about control. They wanted to make me dependent, to turn me into the helpless elderly mother who needed their help for everything. And once they had that control, what would be next? My house? My investments? My entire life's work reduced to whatever they decided I needed? I excused myself from the table, telling them I needed to check on dessert, but instead, I walked into my home office and did something that would prove to be the smartest decision I'd made in years. I called my lawyer. Harold Patterson had been my colleague for over 20 years before becoming my personal attorney when I retired. At 71, he was still sharp as a razor and had seen enough family greed to write a book about it. When I called him that evening, he answered on the second ring. "Amelia, it's past 9 o'clock. What's wrong?" Harold knew me well enough to understand that I didn't make social calls after business hours. "Harold, I need you to listen carefully. My son and his wife just informed me they've decided to sell my car. They've already contacted a dealer. I kept my voice low, aware that my family was still in the dining room, probably discussing what other aspects of my life they planned to reorganize. There was silence on the other end, then Harold's familiar chuckle. Let me guess, they're concerned about your safety? His tone told me he'd heard this story before. That's exactly what they said. They want to control my mobility, Harold. This isn't about safety. This is about making me dependent on them. I walked to my office window and looked out at my BMW parked in the driveway. That car represented more than transportation. It represented my freedom to leave when I wanted, to go where I pleased, to maintain my dignity as an independent woman. Amelia, in my 45 years of practice, I've seen this pattern more times than I care to count. It usually starts with something seemingly reasonable: the car, managing finances, suggesting a smaller living arrangement. Tell me, what else have they been saying lately? I thought back over the past few months. The comments had been subtle at first. Sarah mentioning how overwhelming it must be to maintain such a large house. Michael suggesting I should consider simplifying my investment portfolio. Their increasing insistence that I shouldn't be living alone. The way they'd started making decisions about family gatherings without consulting me, as if I were a child whose opinion didn't matter. They've been building up to this, I realized. The comments about the house being too big, about me being alone, about simplifying my life. This car thing, it's just the beginning, isn't it? I'm afraid so. Amelia, I need to ask you something, and I want you to think carefully before you answer. Have they approached you about any financial matters? Power of attorney? Managing your accounts? My blood ran cold. Just last month, Michael had suggested that it would be easier for everyone if he had access to my main checking account, just to help with household expenses and bills. Sarah had mentioned how complicated it must be for me to manage all my investments alone. They'd even brought up the topic of updating my will, suggesting that with their growing family, I might want to streamline my estate planning. Harold, they're positioning themselves to take control of everything, aren't they? That's exactly what they're doing. And Amelia, I have to tell you, they're being very smart about it. Starting with something that sounds reasonable, something they can frame as concern for your well-being. Once they establish that precedent, once they get you to accept that they know what's best for you, the next steps become much easier. I felt a surge of anger so pure and powerful that it surprised me. These people, my son, whom I had raised and sacrificed for, and his wife, whom I had welcomed into our family with open arms, were systematically planning to strip away my autonomy. They were counting on my love for them, my desire to avoid family conflict, to make me compliant. What do you recommend? I asked. First, don't agree to anything. Not the car, not financial assistance, nothing. Second, we need to document everything. I want you to start keeping a record of every conversation, every suggestion they make about your life. Third, we need to be proactive. What do you mean? Amelia, you're one of the smartest attorneys I've ever worked with. You know as well as I do that the best defense is a good offense. If they want to play games with your independence, we need to remind them exactly who they're dealing with. Harold's words sparked something in me that had been dormant since my retirement. For 40 years, I had been a formidable opponent in courtrooms and boardrooms. I had negotiated million-dollar deals, protected clients from predators, and built a reputation based on strategic thinking and calculated moves. My son and daughter-in-law had never seen that side of me. They only knew me as Mom and Grandma, the woman who cooked Sunday dinners and spoiled their children. What are you thinking, Harold? I'm thinking it's time for Amelia Rockwell, senior partner, to come out of retirement. Just temporarily, of course. When I returned to the dining room, my family was finishing dessert. Sarah was telling the children about the wonderful vacation they'd be able to take with the money from selling Grandma's car. Michael was nodding along, probably already calculating how much of that money he could redirect to his own needs. Mom, Michael said as I sat down, we should probably discuss the details about the car situation. The dealer Sarah contacted can come by this weekend to give us an official appraisal. I looked at my son, this man I had raised, educated, and supported through every challenge of his life, and smiled. That's very thoughtful of you both, I said calmly. But I think there might be a few things we need to discuss first. Sarah and Michael exchanged a look of relief. They thought I was going to be reasonable, that I was going to make this easy for them. If only they knew what I had just set in motion with that 10-minute phone call. The next morning would bring the first surprise in what would become a very educational experience for my dear family. The next morning, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in months. While Michael and Sarah were probably sleeping soundly, confident in their plan to systematically dismantle my independence, I was already 3 steps ahead of them. At exactly 8 o'clock, I called my former assistant, Margaret Chen, who now ran her own private investigation firm. Margaret had worked with me for 15 years at Morrison & Associates, and she knew better than anyone how to uncover the truth when people thought they were being clever. Mrs. Rockwell? Margaret's voice was warm but professional. Harold Patterson called me last night. He said you might need my services. Margaret, I need a complete financial background check on my son Michael and my daughter-in-law Sarah. I want to know everything. Their debts, their spending patterns, their credit history, everything. I was sitting in my home office, the same office where I had planned strategies for countless clients over the years. It felt good to be using it for its intended purpose again. How deep do you want me to go? As deep as necessary. I have a feeling their sudden concern for my well-being has more to do with their own financial situation than my safety. I opened my laptop and pulled up my own financial records. After 40 years of careful planning and strategic investments, my net worth was substantial, more than enough to make me an attractive target for family members with money problems. Margaret's investigation would take a few days, but Harold had already started working on the legal protections we would need. By 9 o'clock that morning, I had appointments scheduled with my financial advisor, my accountant, and the estate planning attorney who had helped me structure my retirement portfolio. At 10:30, my phone rang. It was Sarah. Amelia, I hope you don't mind, but I've scheduled the car appraiser for this afternoon. I know we didn't finalize the details last night, but I thought it would be good to get the process started. Her voice had that same artificially sweet tone she used when she wanted something. Actually, Sarah, I do mind, I said calmly. I haven't agreed to sell my car, and I won't be meeting with any appraisers today. There was a pause. Oh, well, I just thought, after our conversation last night, Michael said you seemed agreeable to the idea. Michael misunderstood. I said the suggestion was thoughtful, not that I agreed to it. I could hear the confusion in her voice. This wasn't going according to their script. Maybe we should all sit down and discuss this again. I'm sure once you understand our concerns, Sarah, I understand your concerns perfectly. What I don't understand is why you think you have any say in what I do with my personal property. My voice remained calm, but there was steel underneath it now. The tone I used to use when opposing counsel thought they could intimidate me. After I hung up, I called my BMW dealership and spoke to James Morrison, the manager who had handled my account for years. James, I need you to do me a favor. If anyone calls claiming to represent me regarding the sale of my vehicle, please don't provide any information without speaking to me directly first. Of course, Mrs. Rockwell. Is everything all right? Everything's fine. I'm just taking some precautionary measures. James had dealt with enough elderly clients to understand what I was implying. Family members overstepping boundaries was unfortunately common in his business. By lunchtime, Margaret called with her preliminary findings. Mrs. Rockwell, you're going to want to sit down for this. I'm ready. Your son Michael has accumulated over $87,000 in credit card debt in the past 18 months. Most of it appears to be from online gambling sites and luxury purchases. Sarah has been maintaining their lifestyle with a series of personal loans, and they're currently 3 months behind on their mortgage payments. I felt my stomach drop. $87,000. No wonder they were suddenly so concerned about my financial well-being. How close are they to losing their house? Very close. Based on what I can see, they have maybe 60 days before the bank initiates foreclosure proceedings. Amelia, that car they want to sell? $45,000 would buy them a few more months, but it wouldn't solve their fundamental problem. What about their other assets? Leveraged to the maximum. The house has been refinanced twice. They've borrowed against Michael's retirement account, and Sarah's credit cards are maxed out. They're in serious financial trouble. After Margaret hung up, I sat in my office staring out the window at the life I had built for myself, the beautiful home I had purchased with my own earnings, the car in my driveway that represented my independence, the investment portfolio that was the result of decades of careful planning and disciplined saving. everything my son and his wife were now eyeing as a solution to their financial irresponsibility. But what hurt most wasn't their greed. It was their deception. Instead of coming to me honestly, explaining their situation and asking for help, they had chosen to manipulate me. They were trying to make me believe I was incompetent, that I needed their protection, that surrendering my independence was for my own good. That afternoon, Harold called with an update on the legal protections we were putting in place. Amelia, I've prepared new power of attorney documents that explicitly exclude Michael and Sarah from any decision-making authority regarding your finances or property. I've also updated your will to include specific provisions that protect against any attempts to claim incompetency. What about the car situation? I've prepared a cease and desist letter that I'll send to any dealer or appraiser they contact. Legally, they have no authority to sell your property, but sometimes family members can be persuasive if the dealer doesn't understand the situation. That evening, Michael called. His voice was tense. Mom, Sarah said you were difficult about the car appraisal today. I thought we had agreed this was the best thing for everyone. Michael, we didn't agree to anything. You and Sarah decided something without consulting me, then informed me of your decision. That's not how agreements work. I kept my voice level, professional. The same tone I used to use when explaining legal realities to clients who didn't want to hear them. But Mom, we're just trying to help. You don't really need that car, and the money could be so much better used. Better used for what, Michael? The question hung in the air between us. Well, invested properly, managed responsibly. My money is already invested properly and managed responsibly. By me. There was a long pause. Michael, is there something you need to tell me? Some reason why you suddenly need access to $45,000? I don't know what you're implying, but I'm not implying anything. I'm asking directly. Are you and Sarah having financial difficulties? Another pause, longer this time. Everyone has financial pressures, Mom. That's just part of life. Yes, it is. And part of being an adult is handling those pressures yourself, not manipulating your family members to solve your problems. The silence stretched between us until Michael finally spoke. I think you're misunderstanding our intentions, Mom. We'll talk more about this later. After he hung up, I realized that my son had just confirmed everything Margaret had discovered. They weren't concerned about my well-being. They were desperate about their own financial situation. And tomorrow I would begin showing them exactly what happens when you underestimate Amelia Rockwell. The next morning brought a surprise I hadn't expected. My doorbell rang at 7:30, and when I opened it, I found my neighbor Eleanor Martinez standing on my porch with a concerned expression and a cup of coffee in her hands. Amelia, I hope you don't mind me stopping by so early, but I heard something yesterday that I thought you should know about. Eleanor was 75, a retired nurse who had lived next door for over a decade. We had always maintained a friendly relationship, sharing the occasional conversation over our garden fence. Of course, Eleanor. Come in. She followed me into the kitchen, where I poured myself coffee and settled in to listen. Yesterday afternoon I was working in my front garden when I saw a man with a clipboard taking pictures of your car. When I asked him what he was doing, he said he was doing an appraisal for your family because they were planning to sell it. My blood began to simmer. Despite my clear refusal to meet with any appraiser, Sarah had gone ahead and sent someone to my house anyway. What did you tell him? I told him that seemed odd, since I had just seen you driving it the day before and you seemed perfectly capable. He said your family was concerned about your safety and that you had agreed to give up driving. Eleanor's eyes were sharp with intelligence. Amelia, I've been a nurse for 50 years. I know the difference between someone who needs help and someone who's being taken advantage of. What else did he say? He asked me questions about you. How often I see you driving, whether you seem confused or forgetful, if I've noticed any problems with your mobility. I told him you're one of the sharpest people I know and that he should probably mind his own business. The audacity was breathtaking. Not only had they ignored my refusal to sell the car, but they were now trying to build a case that I was incompetent. They were gathering evidence to support their narrative that taking away my independence was necessary for my protection. Eleanor, would you be willing to write down what happened? The questions he asked? What he told you? Already done. She pulled a folded piece of paper from her purse. I've been dealing with family members who try to take advantage of elderly patients my whole career. I know predatory behavior when I see it. After Eleanor left, I called Harold immediately. They sent an appraiser anyway, I told him. And they're questioning my neighbors about my competency. That's actually good news for us, Harold said. It shows premeditation and deception. They're not just making impulsive decisions about your car. They're building a systematic case to undermine your independence. That's going to work in our favor. How so? Because now we can demonstrate a pattern of manipulation and deception. Amelia, I think it's time we move to the next phase of our strategy. At 10 o'clock, I had a meeting at Morrison & Associates with my former law partner, David Morrison. David had taken over the firm when I retired, but we had remained close friends and occasional collaborators. When I explained the situation, his reaction was immediate and fierce. They're trying to financially elder abuse you, he said bluntly. Amelia, this is exactly the kind of case we handle every day. Family members who manipulate elderly relatives into giving up their assets and independence. I want to be prepared for whatever they're planning next, I told him. If they're willing to go behind my back on the car, what else are they planning? David leaned forward in his chair. Let me ask you something. Have they mentioned anything about your living situation, your house, your investment accounts? Sarah has made several comments about the house being too big for me. Michael suggested I might want him to help manage my finances. As I said it out loud, the pattern became even clearer. Classic progression. First, they establish that you can't be trusted with transportation. Then they'll argue that managing a large house is too much for you. Finally, they'll suggest that your finances are too complicated and you need their help managing them. David pulled out a legal pad and started taking notes. Amelia, we need to document everything. Every conversation, every suggestion, every attempt to undermine your autonomy. I've already started that process. Good. Now let me ask you this. How much do they know about your actual financial situation? I thought about it carefully. They know I'm comfortable, but I don't think they understand the full scope of my assets. I've always been private about my finances. That's probably why they're moving so aggressively. They think you're a typical retiree with some savings and a house. They have no idea they're trying to manipulate someone with your resources and connections. At 2 o'clock that afternoon, Margaret called with additional findings that made my situation even clearer and more infuriating. Amelia, I've been digging deeper into their financial records. The gambling debt is worse than I initially thought. Michael has been using multiple online platforms, and he's borrowed money from some very questionable sources. They're not just facing foreclosure. They're in debt to people who don't accept late payments gracefully. How bad is it? Bad enough that they're desperate. I also found something else interesting. Sarah has been researching elder care attorneys and guardianship procedures. She's downloaded forms and informational pamphlets about having someone declared incompetent. The pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. This wasn't just about my car or even my money. They were planning to have me declared incompetent so they could gain legal control over my entire estate. The car was just the first step in a comprehensive plan to strip away everything I had worked for. Margaret, I need you to find out everything you can about their research into guardianship. I want to know exactly what they're planning and how far they're willing to go. That evening, I received a call that confirmed my worst suspicions. It was Dr. Patricia Webb, my longtime physician. Amelia, I had an unusual call today. Your daughter-in-law contacted my office asking about your medical records and whether I've noticed any signs of cognitive decline or memory problems. Dr. Webb's voice was carefully neutral, but I could hear the concern underneath. What did you tell them? I told them that I couldn't discuss your medical information with anyone without your written consent. But Amelia, the questions they were asking were very specific. They weren't just asking about your general health. They wanted to know about any medications that might affect your judgment, any signs of dementia or confusion, any mobility issues that might make driving dangerous. They're building a case, I said quietly. That's exactly what it sounds like. Amelia, I've been your doctor for 15 years. You're one of the healthiest, most mentally sharp patients I have. If someone is trying to suggest otherwise, they're not acting in your best interests. After Dr. Webb hung up, I sat in my living room looking around at the home I had created for myself. Every piece of furniture, every painting on the walls, Every book on the shelves represented choices I had made with my own money and my own judgment. The idea that my son and his wife were systematically working to take all of that away from me was almost incomprehensible. But what they had forgotten, what they had never really known, was that Amelia Rockwell didn't get to where she was by being a victim. Tomorrow, I would begin showing them the difference between a grandmother who spoils her family and a senior partner who protects her clients. The time for defense was over. It was time to go on the offense. Friday morning brought a revelation that shattered any remaining illusions I had about my family's intentions. Margaret called at 8 o'clock with findings that left me speechless. "Amelia, you need to know what I discovered overnight. Sarah has been in contact with Sunset Manor, that expensive assisted living facility across town. She's been asking about availability, costs, and their policies for residents who are transferred there by family members." I gripped the phone tighter. Transferred by family members? She specifically asked about their procedures for residents whose families have guardianship or power of attorney. "Amelia, she's not just planning to take control of your finances, she's planning to have you institutionalized." The room seemed to spin around me. They weren't just after my money. They wanted to warehouse me in an assisted living facility so they could take complete control of my life and assets. The beautiful home where I had raised my son, where I had planned to spend my remaining years surrounded by memories and independence, would become theirs to sell. "There's more," Margaret continued. "I found correspondence between Sarah and a lawyer who specializes in elder law, specifically guardianship cases. She's been asking about the process for having someone declared incompetent when they refuse to acknowledge their limitations." "Who's the lawyer?" "Richard Blackwood. He has a reputation for taking questionable cases if the money is right. Amelia, they're not just desperate. They're planning a full legal assault on your competency." After Margaret hung up, I sat in my kitchen staring at the coffee cup in my hands. These were the same hands that had signed million-dollar contracts, that had held my son when he was sick, that had worked tirelessly to build the life they now wanted to strip away from me. The betrayal was so complete, so calculated, that it took my breath away. Harold arrived at 10 o'clock for an emergency meeting. When I told him what Margaret had discovered, his face grew grim. "Amelia, they're moving faster than I expected. If they're already consulting with Blackwood and looking at assisted living facilities, they're planning to file for guardianship soon." "How soon?" "Probably within the next few weeks. They'll need to establish a pattern of evidence that suggests you're no longer capable of making rational decisions. The car incident was just the beginning. They'll manufacture more situations where they can claim you're acting irrationally or dangerously." "What kind of situations?" Harold pulled out a thick folder of documents. "Based on similar cases I've handled, they'll probably try to create incidents where you appear confused, forgetful, or make poor decisions. They might arrange situations where you're put in positions that make you look incompetent. Missed appointments they claim you agreed to. Financial transactions they say you don't remember. Conversations where they'll later claim you were disoriented." The strategic cruelty of it was breathtaking. They were planning to gaslight me, to create false evidence of incompetency that they could present to a court. Every interaction with them from now on would be a potential trap. "Harold, I need to ask you something, and I want a completely honest answer. How often do these guardianship cases succeed?" He was quiet for a long moment. "When they're legitimate? When someone genuinely needs protection? They succeed most of the time, and they should. But when they're motivated by greed? When family members manipulate the system?" He met my eyes. "They succeed about 60% of the time, Amelia. The burden of proof is surprisingly low, and judges tend to err on the side of caution when family members express concerns about an elderly person's safety. 60%. The odds were not in my favor, despite my obvious competency. The system was designed to protect vulnerable elderly people, but that same protection could be weaponized by predatory family members who knew how to work the system. What do we need to do? We need to be proactive and comprehensive. First, we document everything, every conversation, every attempt at manipulation, every lie they tell. Second, we build our own evidence of your competency. Third, we prepare for their attack before they launch it. At noon, I met with Dr. Patricia Webb for a comprehensive evaluation that would establish my mental and physical competency. She conducted cognitive tests, memory assessments, and a thorough physical examination. "Amelia, Your test scores are in the 95th percentile for your age group. Your memory, reasoning abilities, and judgment are all well above average. I'm going to document everything thoroughly because I suspect you're going to need this evidence soon. How did you know? Because I've seen this pattern before. Family members who start asking suspicious questions about a patient's competency are usually building up to something. The fact that they contacted me without your permission tells me they're not acting in good faith. After leaving Dr. Webb's office, I drove to my bank to meet with Jonathan Pierce, my financial advisor for the past 20 years. Jonathan had helped me structure my retirement portfolio and knew better than anyone that I was completely capable of managing my own affairs. Mrs. Rockwell, I have to tell you, your son called yesterday asking about your investment accounts. He said he was concerned about your ability to make sound financial decisions and wanted to discuss taking a more active role in managing your portfolio. What did you tell him? I told him that you're one of our most financially astute clients and that I couldn't discuss your accounts with anyone without your written authorization. But Mrs. Rockwell, the questions he was asking were concerning. He seemed to think you had given him permission to access information about your finances. He had no such permission. That's what I assumed. I've flagged your accounts to require additional verification for any requests for information or access. But I wanted you to know that someone is definitely fishing for details about your financial situation. By late afternoon, I had a complete picture of their strategy. They were systematically contacting everyone in my professional and medical network, laying the groundwork for their claim that I was no longer competent. They were researching legal procedures for guardianship and assisted living arrangements. They were creating situations designed to make me appear confused or irrational. But they had made one crucial miscalculation. They thought they were dealing with a lonely, isolated elderly woman who would be overwhelmed by their coordinated attack. Instead, they had chosen to target a former senior partner at one of the city's most prestigious law firms, someone who had spent 40 years outmaneuvering opponents who were far more sophisticated than they were. That evening, Harold called with our first piece of offensive strategy. Amelia, I've been thinking about this all day, and I believe we need to force their hand. Instead of waiting for them to file for guardianship on their timeline, we need to create a situation where they reveal their true intentions publicly. What do you have in mind? We're going to give them an opportunity to show everyone exactly who they really are, and we're going to do it in a way that creates witnesses, documentation, and evidence that will make their guardianship case impossible to win. How? We're going to plan a family meeting. We're going to invite them to your house for what they think is a discussion about your future. But instead of the vulnerable, confused woman they're expecting to manipulate, they're going to encounter the senior partner who never lost a case that mattered. Harold's plan was brilliant in its simplicity. We would use their own greed and arrogance against them. We would give them enough rope to hang themselves, and we would make sure there were witnesses to document every word. When? I asked. This weekend. Strike while they're confident and before they realize how much we know about their plans. As I hung up the phone, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, the thrill of strategic combat. Michael and Sarah had chosen the wrong target, and they were about to learn exactly what happened when you tried to outmaneuver Amelia Rockwell. Saturday morning, I began orchestrating what would become the most important family meeting of my life. But unlike every other family gathering I had hosted, this one would be carefully planned, thoroughly documented, and strategically designed to expose the truth about my son and daughter-in-law's intentions. Harold arrived at 9 o'clock with a briefcase full of legal documents and a detailed plan that would give Michael and Sarah exactly what they thought they wanted, an opportunity to convince me to surrender my independence. What they wouldn't know was that every word they spoke would be carefully recorded and witnessed. Amelia, I've arranged for Margaret to be here as a witness, positioned where she can hear everything but remain out of sight. I've also contacted Dr. Webb, and she's agreed to be available by phone if we need immediate medical testimony about your competency. What about the recording? Legal in this state as long as one party consents, and you're consenting to record conversations in your own home. We'll have audio documentation of everything they say. Harold pulled out a small device no bigger than a pen. This will capture everything clearly. I called Michael at 10 o'clock, using the same warm, slightly confused tone they had probably been expecting since this whole ordeal began. Michael, honey, I've been thinking about our conversation the other night, And I realize I may have been a bit hasty in my response. Maybe we should sit down and talk through this car situation properly. There was immediate relief in his voice. Of course, Mom. I'm so glad you're being reasonable about this. Sarah and I were worried we had upset you. Not at all, dear. Why don't you both come over tomorrow afternoon? We can discuss everything calmly, and maybe you can help me understand why you think this is the best decision for me. That sounds perfect. Should we bring the kids? Actually, I think this conversation might be better with just the adults. We can have a nice dinner afterward and discuss some other things that have been on my mind. After I hung up, Harold smiled with the satisfaction of a lawyer who had just set the perfect trap. They think you're capitulating. They're going to come in confident and probably reveal far more than they intended. What if they're more careful than we expect? Amelia, in my experience, greed makes people careless. They want your assets so badly that they'll say whatever they think they need to say to get them. Our job is to create an environment where they feel safe, revealing their true intentions. Sunday afternoon, I prepared for the meeting with the same attention to detail I had once brought to major litigation. Margaret was positioned in the adjacent room with a clear view of the living room. Harold was in my home office, close enough to intervene if necessary, but out of sight. The recording device was activated and hidden among the decorative items on my coffee table. I had prepared tea and cookies, playing the role of the gracious grandmother who wanted nothing more than family harmony. When Michael and Sarah arrived at 2 o'clock, they were clearly expecting an easy victory. "Mom, you look wonderful," Michael said, giving me a hug that felt more calculated than affectionate. "We're so relieved that you want to talk about this reasonably." Sarah was carrying a folder of documents, which immediately caught my attention. "Amelia, we've brought some information that we think will help you understand why we're so concerned about your situation." We settled in the living room, and I poured tea with slightly trembling hands, a performance designed to reinforce their belief that I was a frail, elderly woman who needed their guidance. "Now," I said, settling back in my chair, "help me understand why you think I shouldn't be driving anymore." Sarah opened her folder and pulled out several printed pages. "Well, Amelia, we've been doing research about driving safety for people your age. The statistics are really quite alarming." She began reading numbers about accident rates and reaction times, clearly prepared to overwhelm me with data. Michael leaned forward earnestly. "Mom, we're not trying to take away your independence. We're trying to protect you and other people on the road. At your age, reflexes slow down, vision changes, medication can affect judgment." What medications?" I asked innocently. "Well, whatever medications you're taking. We don't really know because you haven't shared that information with us." "Should I be sharing my medical information with you?" Sarah and Michael exchanged a look. "Mom," Michael said carefully, "as your family, we should know about things that might affect your safety. It's part of our responsibility to look out for you." "I see. And what other responsibilities do you think you should have regarding my life?" Sarah pulled out another document. "Actually, we've been thinking about that quite a bit. We think it might be time to consider some changes that would make your life easier and safer." "What kind of changes?" "Well, this house is really quite large for one person. The maintenance, the utilities, the property taxes, it's a lot to manage alone. We've been looking at some wonderful assisted living communities that would take care of all those concerns for you." Michael nodded enthusiastically. "And Mom, the financial benefits would be significant. Selling this house and your car, investing that money properly, you could have a much more secure future." "Invested by whom?" "Well, by us, of course. Sarah has been taking some financial planning courses, and I have experience with investment accounts through my work. We could make sure your money is working as hard as possible for you." I felt a cold satisfaction as they laid out their plan with breathtaking audacity. They weren't even pretending this was entirely about my well-being. They were openly discussing taking control of my assets. And what would happen to my money after I'm gone? Sarah's smile became even more practiced. "Oh, Amelia, let's not talk about unpleasant things like that. But of course, we'd want to make sure everything is structured to benefit the family, especially the grandchildren." "The grandchildren?" "Well, yes. Michael and I have been thinking that it would make sense for us to manage any inheritance on their behalf. You know, make sure it's invested wisely, used for their education and future needs." I nodded thoughtfully. playing the role of the grandmother who just wanted to do right by her family. This all sounds very complicated. How would we make these changes official? Michael reached into Sarah's folder and pulled out more documents. Actually, Mom, we've already researched that. There are some legal forms we'd need you to sign. Power of attorney documents, guardianship papers, that sort of thing. We've even found a lawyer who specializes in helping families with these transitions. A lawyer? Richard Blackwood. He's very experienced with elderly clients who need help managing their affairs. I nearly smiled at the mention of Blackwood's name. They were handing me everything I needed to demonstrate their premeditated plan to take control of my life and assets. When would all this happen? Sarah leaned forward eagerly. Well, we thought we could start with the car situation this week, get that resolved, and then begin looking at assisted living options. The legal paperwork could be handled fairly quickly once you decide you're ready. And if I'm not ready? The question hung in the air for a moment too long. Michael's smile became strained. Mom, we hope you'll see that this is really the best thing for everyone. But if you're having trouble making these decisions, there are legal procedures that can help families when elderly parents aren't able to make rational choices about their safety. There it was, the threat, delivered with a smile and wrapped in concern, but a threat nonetheless. Submit to their plan voluntarily, or they would use the legal system to force compliance. I set down my teacup and looked at my son and daughter-in-law with clear eyes. Thank you both for explaining this so thoroughly. I think I understand your position completely now. So you'll agree to start with selling the car? Sarah asked hopefully. Oh, Sarah, I said softly. I think there are going to be some changes around here, but probably not the ones you're expecting. The confused look that passed between them was the first indication that their easy victory might not be as certain as they had believed. The moment Michael and Sarah left my house that Sunday evening, Harold emerged from my office with a satisfied expression that matched my own feelings perfectly. Amelia, they just handed us everything we need to destroy their guardianship case before they even file it, he said, reviewing his notes from the conversation. Premeditated conspiracy, financial motivation, threats of forced legal action, it's all documented now. Margaret joined us in the living room, carrying her own detailed notes. They didn't just reveal their plan, she said. They confessed to already having researched legal procedures, contacted assisted living facilities, and retained an attorney. This isn't a family concerned about an elderly relative. This is a coordinated effort to commit financial elder abuse. I felt a surge of the old courtroom energy that had made me successful for 4 decades. What's our next step? Harold pulled out his phone. First, I'm calling Judge Patricia Morrison. She handles most of the guardianship cases in this county. We're going to file a preemptive motion for a competency hearing where you can demonstrate your full mental capacity before they have a chance to file their petition. Can we do that? When there's evidence of potential abuse, absolutely. You have the right to protect yourself from false claims of incompetency. Harold was already dialing. Judge Morrison knows you professionally, Amelia. She's not going to look kindly on family members trying to manipulate the system for financial gain. While Harold made his calls, Margaret continued her investigation into Michael and Sarah's financial situation. What she discovered over the next few hours painted an even more desperate picture than we had initially understood. Amelia, their situation is worse than critical, Margaret reported when she called Monday morning. Michael's gambling debts aren't just credit card debt. He owes money to a loan shark operation that operates out of the downtown casino district. We're talking about people who don't negotiate payment plans. How much does he owe them? At least $40,000, possibly more. And Sarah's personal loans are coming due this month. They have exactly 17 days before the bank forecloses on their house. Margaret's voice was grim. They're not just desperate for your money, Amelia. They're running out of time to avoid financial catastrophe, which means they'll move faster than we expected. Exactly. I wouldn't be surprised if they try to file guardianship papers this week. Harold called at 10 o'clock with news that confirmed our suspicions. I spoke with Judge Morrison, and she's agreed to schedule an emergency competency hearing for Thursday. But Amelia, I also learned something troubling. Richard Blackwood filed preliminary paperwork on Friday afternoon for a guardianship petition. He hasn't submitted it yet, but he's prepared to file it at any moment. Friday afternoon? But they just contacted him recently. That's what they want you to believe. Margaret's investigation suggests they've been planning this for months. The conversation yesterday wasn't them explaining a new idea. It was them giving you one last chance to comply voluntarily before they forced the issue. I spent Monday afternoon meeting with every professional who could testify to my competency. Dr. Webb prepared a comprehensive medical evaluation documenting my excellent physical and mental health. Jonathan Pierce assembled financial records proving my sound judgment in managing complex investments. David Morrison drafted a professional reference detailing my years of successful legal practice and continued sharp analytical abilities. But the most powerful evidence came from an unexpected source. Eleanor Martinez, my neighbor, had been busy over the weekend gathering her own documentation. "Amelia, I hope you don't mind, but I contacted several of our other neighbors about what I witnessed with that car appraiser," she said when she stopped by Monday evening. "Everyone wants to help." She handed me a folder containing written statements from 6 neighbors, each describing their regular interactions with me and testifying to my obvious competency and independence. Mrs. Chen from across the street described our frequent conversations about gardening and current events. The Johnsons next door detailed my help with their legal questions when they were buying their home. Tom Bradley from down the block recounted my assistance with his mother's estate planning. "These people see you every day," Eleanor said. "They know you're not some confused elderly woman who needs a guardian. They're outraged that anyone would try to claim otherwise." Tuesday brought the most crucial development yet. Margaret called with information that changed everything about our legal strategy. "Amelia, I've been investigating Richard Blackwood more thoroughly. He's been disciplined by the state bar twice for questionable practices in guardianship cases. More importantly, I found records of his previous cases, and there's a clear pattern." "What kind of pattern?" "He specializes in fast-track guardianship petitions for families who claim elderly relatives are incompetent. In every case, the alleged incompetent person was financially well off, and the family members who gained guardianship immediately sold off assets and moved the elderly person into institutional care. How many cases? 15 in the past 3 years. And in every single case, the elderly person tried to fight the guardianship but was unsuccessful because they didn't have adequate legal representation or documentation of their competency. Harold was furious when I told him about Blackwood's history. "This isn't just a lawyer taking a questionable case," he said. "This is someone who has turned elder abuse into a business model. Judge Morrison needs to know about this pattern." Wednesday morning, we received the news we had been expecting. Michael and Sarah had filed their guardianship petition, claiming I was no longer capable of making rational decisions about my safety and finances. The petition included statements from the car appraiser, claiming I appeared confused and disoriented. A letter from Sarah detailing my alleged dangerous driving and poor financial judgment, and a request for emergency guardianship due to my immediate risk of financial exploitation. The irony was breathtaking. They were claiming I needed protection from financial exploitation while simultaneously trying to gain control of my assets for their own benefit. Harold reviewed their petition with the clinical precision of a surgeon examining a malignant tumor. "They're claiming you agreed to sell your car and then became hostile and irrational when they tried to follow through. They say you've been making increasingly poor financial decisions and have become suspicious and paranoid about family members who are only trying to help." What about their evidence? Mostly fabricated or distorted. The car appraiser's statement is clearly coached. He describes behavior that doesn't match what Eleanor witnessed. Sarah's letter reads like a script designed to hit all the legal criteria for incompetency. But will it be enough to convince a judge? Harold smiled grimly. Under normal circumstances, possibly. Judges tend to err on the side of caution when family members express concerns. But these aren't normal circumstances. We have documentation they don't know we possess, witnesses they didn't expect, and evidence of their true motivations that will destroy their credibility. Wednesday evening, I received a phone call that served as the final confirmation of everything we had discovered. It was Michael, and his voice was strained with barely controlled desperation. "Mom, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. Exactly how much money do you have?" The directness of the question took my breath away. No pretense of concern for my well-being, no gentle suggestions about financial planning, just raw greed, finally exposed. "Why do you need to know that, Michael?" Because Sarah and I are trying to help you plan for your future, and we need to know what resources we're working with. You mean what resources you'll be working with if you gain guardianship over me? There was a long pause. Mom, I don't know what you think is happening here, but we're just trying to protect you. Protect me from what? From living independently in my own home? From driving my own car? From managing the money I earned through 40 years of hard work? From making mistakes that could hurt you? His voice rose with frustration. You're not thinking clearly anymore, and someone has to make sure you don't lose everything you've worked for. The only mistake I made, Michael, was not recognizing sooner that my own son would try to steal my life from me. He hung up without another word, but he had given me the final piece of evidence I needed. Tomorrow's competency hearing wouldn't just be about proving my mental capacity. It would be about exposing a calculated conspiracy to commit elder abuse. And Michael and Sarah were about to learn that when you try to destroy Amelia Rockwell, you better make sure you succeed on the first attempt, because there wouldn't be a second chance. Thursday morning arrived with the crisp clarity that only comes when you're completely prepared for battle. I dressed in my best navy blue suit, the same one I had worn to closing arguments in my most important cases, and arrived at the courthouse 45 minutes early with Harold and our carefully assembled evidence. Judge Patricia Morrison's courtroom was familiar territory. I had argued dozens of cases before her over the years, and she had always respected thorough preparation and clear presentation of facts. Today, both would be crucial. Michael and Sarah arrived with Richard Blackwood, who looked exactly like what he was, a lawyer who specialized in taking advantage of vulnerable situations. He was smooth, professionally dressed, and carried himself with the confidence of someone who had manipulated this system successfully many times before. What they didn't know was that Margaret was positioned in the back of the courtroom, along with Eleanor Martinez and 2 other neighbors who had volunteered to serve as character witnesses. Dr. Webb was standing by, ready to testify about my medical and mental competency. Jonathan Pierce had brought comprehensive financial records demonstrating my sound judgment in managing complex investments. Judge Morrison called the hearing to order at 9 o'clock sharp. This is a petition for emergency guardianship filed by Michael Rockwell and Sarah Rockwell concerning Amelia Rockwell. Mr. Blackwood, present your case. Blackwood stood with practiced confidence. Your Honor, we're here today because Mrs. Amelia Rockwell, despite being a formerly competent and successful woman, has begun showing clear signs of cognitive decline and poor judgment that put her at risk of financial exploitation and physical harm. He presented their fabricated evidence methodically. The car appraiser's coached statement about my alleged confusion, Sarah's letter detailing supposed incidents of forgetfulness and poor decision-making, and Michael's testimony about my increasing paranoia and hostility toward family members who were only trying to help. Your Honor, Blackwood continued, Mrs. Rockwell has refused reasonable safety measures such as giving up driving, rejected family assistance with financial management, and has become increasingly isolated and suspicious. We're asking for emergency guardianship to protect her from herself and from potential exploitation by outside parties. When Blackwood finished, Judge Morrison turned to Harold. Mr. Patterson, your response? Harold stood and approached the bench with the measured confidence of a lawyer who held all the winning cards. Your Honor, what we have here is not a case of an elderly woman needing protection. What we have is a calculated conspiracy to commit financial elder abuse through manipulation of the guardianship system. Harold presented our evidence systematically and devastatingly. The audio recording of Sunday's meeting, where Michael and Sarah had revealed their premeditated plan to gain control of my assets. Margaret's financial investigation showing their desperate debt situation and timeline for foreclosure. The documentation of their contacts with assisted living facilities and their research into guardianship procedures weeks before they claimed to become concerned about my competency. Your Honor, Harold said, these petitioners aren't concerned family members trying to protect an incompetent relative. They are financially desperate individuals who have targeted Mrs. Rockwell's substantial assets as a solution to their own irresponsible spending and gambling debts. Judge Morrison's expression grew increasingly stern as Harold presented the evidence. When he played the audio recording of Michael and Sarah discussing their plans to control my investments and sell my assets, her face darkened with obvious anger. Furthermore, Your Honor, Harold continued. We have extensive documentation of Mrs. Rockwell's continued competency and sharp mental acuity. He presented Dr. Webb's medical evaluation, Jonathan Pierce's financial assessment, and the neighbor testimonies. Then came the moment I had been waiting for. Judge Morrison called me to testify on my own behalf. I approached the witness stand with the same confidence I had once brought to countless courtrooms. This was my element, my arena, and these people were about to learn exactly who they had chosen to target. Mrs. Rockwell, Judge Morrison said, please tell the court in your own words about the events that led to this hearing. I looked directly at Michael and Sarah as I spoke. Your Honor, for the past several months, my son and daughter-in-law have been systematically working to undermine my independence and gain control of my assets. They have lied to medical professionals, manipulated appraisers, and conspired with an attorney to fabricate evidence of my incompetency. I detailed every incident, their demand to sell my car, their unauthorized contact with my doctor and financial advisor, their research into assisted living facilities and guardianship procedures, their threats to use legal force if I didn't comply with their demands. Your Honor, I concluded, I am a 63-year-old woman with 4 decades of successful legal practice, excellent physical and mental health, and substantial financial resources that I have managed responsibly throughout my life. The only threat to my well-being comes from family members who see my assets as a solution to their own financial irresponsibility. Judge Morrison asked me several questions designed to test my mental acuity and judgment. I answered each one clearly and comprehensively, demonstrating not just competency but exceptional sharpness for someone of any age. When Michael was called to testify, his performance was devastating to their case. Under Harold's cross-examination, he was forced to admit his gambling debts, his impending foreclosure, and his timeline of desperation that coincided exactly with their sudden concern for my well-being. Mr. Rockwell, Harold asked, when did you first become concerned about your mother's mental competency? About 3 months ago, Michael answered. And when did you first incur significant gambling debts? Michael's lawyer objected, but Judge Morrison overruled. About 4 months ago. And when did you learn your house was going into foreclosure? About 3 months ago. So your concern for your mother's competency developed at exactly the same time you learned you were facing financial catastrophe? Michael had no answer that wouldn't damn him further. Sarah's testimony was even worse. Harold presented evidence of her research into guardianship procedures, her contacts with assisted living facilities, and her consultation with Blackwood, all occurring before they claimed to notice any problems with my competency. Mrs. Rockwell, Harold asked, how much money do you estimate your mother-in-law is worth? I don't know exactly, Sarah answered. Harold presented Jonathan Pierce's financial summary. According to her financial advisor, Mrs. Amelia Rockwell's net worth is approximately $2.8 million. Does that surprise you? Sarah's face went pale. They had been planning to steal my independence and assets without even knowing the full scope of what they were trying to take. When all testimony was complete, Judge Morrison called a brief recess. I could see Michael and Sarah whispering frantically with Blackwood, probably realizing for the first time how completely their plan had collapsed. When court reconvened, Judge Morrison delivered a judgment that was swift, decisive, and absolutely devastating to their case. After reviewing all evidence and testimony, she said, this court finds that Mrs. Amelia Rockwell is completely competent to manage her own affairs, and that this guardianship petition is not only without merit, but appears to be a fraudulent attempt to gain control of her assets through manipulation of the legal system. She turned to face Michael and Sarah directly. Furthermore, this court is referring this matter to the district attorney's office for investigation of potential elder abuse charges, and to the state bar for investigation of Mr. Blackwood's involvement in what appears to be a pattern of questionable guardianship cases. The guardianship petition was not only denied, it was exposed as the criminal conspiracy it had always been. But Judge Morrison wasn't finished. Mrs. Rockwell, she said, turning to me, this court recommends that you consider filing civil charges against these individuals for attempted fraud and elder abuse. You clearly have grounds for substantial damages. As I left the courthouse that morning, walking past Michael and Sarah, who couldn't even look me in the eye, I felt a satisfaction deeper than any courtroom victory I had ever achieved. They had underestimated not just my resources and connections, but my fundamental strength and intelligence. But the hearing was just the beginning. Now it was time for the consequences phase of their education in exactly who Amelia Rockwell really was. The satisfaction of Thursday's courtroom victory lasted exactly until Friday morning, when Margaret called with news that crystallized my resolve to ensure Michael and Sarah faced real consequences for their betrayal. Amelia, I've been monitoring their communications since the hearing, and they're not done. Sarah spent yesterday afternoon calling assisted living facilities, telling them the guardianship was just delayed, not denied. She's still trying to find ways to have you institutionalized. What do you mean? She's researching adult protective services complaints, looking for ways to trigger a state investigation into your living situation. She's also contacted 3 different lawyers since Blackwood withdrew from their case. The audacity was breathtaking. Even after being exposed in court, even after Judge Morrison's scathing judgment, they were still scheming to find another way to gain control of my life and assets. Margaret, I want you to document everything. Every call, every contact, every attempt they make to continue this harassment. Already on it. But Amelia, there's something else you need to know. Michael showed up at your bank yesterday, claiming to be your son and saying there was a family emergency that required immediate access to your accounts. My blood ran cold. What did they tell him? Nothing, thank God. Jonathan Pierce had already flagged your accounts after our meeting. But Michael was persistent, and he seemed to know specific details about your banking relationship that he shouldn't have access to. Harold arrived at my house within an hour of Margaret's call, carrying a briefcase full of legal documents that would begin the next phase of our response. Amelia, it's time to go on the offensive. They've made it clear that Thursday's hearing wasn't the end of their attempts. It was just a setback they're trying to work around. What do you recommend? Civil litigation for attempted fraud, elder abuse, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. We have enough evidence to seek substantial damages, and more importantly, to get a restraining order that prohibits them from contacting your medical providers, financial institutions, or anyone else involved in your personal affairs. Harold spread the documents across my dining room table. We're also going to file a criminal complaint with the district attorney's office. What they attempted wasn't just unethical. It was illegal elder abuse under state law. What about Michael? He's still my son. Harold's expression was sympathetic but firm. Amelia, being family doesn't give someone the right to commit crimes against you. If anything, the betrayal of trust makes their actions worse, not better. That afternoon, I made one of the most difficult decisions of my life. I authorized Harold to file both civil and criminal complaints against Michael and Sarah. As I signed the documents, I thought about the little boy I had raised alone, the young man I had put through college, the son I had loved unconditionally for 36 years. But that person was gone, replaced by someone who saw me as nothing more than an obstacle between him and my money. Monday morning brought the first real consequence of their actions. Harold served them with papers for a civil lawsuit seeking $250,000 in damages for attempted fraud, elder abuse, and emotional distress. He also delivered a restraining order prohibiting them from contacting any of my medical providers, financial institutions, or professional associates. Margaret was positioned across the street when the process server arrived at their house. Amelia, you should have seen their faces. Sarah answered the door, took one look at the papers, and started screaming at Michael. The whole neighborhood could hear her. What was she saying? Mostly blaming him for the gambling debts and accusing him of ruining their lives. But the interesting part was what she said about you. She called you a vindictive old woman who was going to destroy their family out of spite. Spite? I felt a cold anger settle in my chest. They tried to steal my independence, my home, and my life's work, and she thinks my response is spite? That afternoon, Michael called. His voice was shaky, desperate, and completely different from the confident tone he'd used when he thought he was manipulating a helpless elderly woman. Mom, we need to talk. There's been a misunderstanding, and I think we can work this out without involving lawyers and lawsuits. Michael, the only misunderstanding was mine. I misunderstood who you really are. That's not fair. We were genuinely concerned about you, and maybe we went about it the wrong way, but our intentions were good. Your intentions were to gain control of my assets to solve your financial problems. We have recordings of you saying exactly that. There was a long pause. "Mom, if we could just sit down and talk." "We're past talking, Michael. You had multiple opportunities to be honest with me about your financial situation and ask for help. Instead, you chose to try to destroy my independence and steal my life's work. Those choices have consequences. What do you want from us? I want you to understand that actions have consequences. I want you to learn that you can't manipulate and betray people without facing the results of those choices." Tuesday brought news that their financial situation was deteriorating even faster than we had anticipated. Margaret's investigation revealed that they had borrowed money from Michael's retirement account, taken cash advances on every available credit card, and had even pawned Sarah's jewelry to make minimum payments on their debts. "They're in complete free fall," Margaret reported. "The house foreclosure is proceeding, Michael's employer has been contacted by creditors, and the loan sharks he owes money to are apparently making their displeasure known." "How do you know about the loan sharks?" "Because Sarah filed a police report claiming someone left threatening messages on their voicemail. She didn't mention Michael's gambling debts in the report, just said they were receiving threats from unknown individuals." Wednesday afternoon, Sarah appeared at my door. She looked haggard, desperate, and completely different from the confident woman who had sat in my living room just a week earlier explaining how they planned to manage my life. "Amelia, please, we need to talk." "Sarah, there's a restraining order that prohibits you from contacting me. This isn't about the legal stuff. This is about family, about Emma and James." The mention of my grandchildren was a calculated move, but it was also a mistake. "What about Emma and James? They're going to lose their home. They're going to have to change schools, leave their friends. Is that really what you want?" I looked at this woman who had planned to warehouse me in an assisted living facility so she could steal my assets and felt no sympathy whatsoever. "Sarah, you and Michael created this situation with your irresponsible spending and gambling. The consequences of your choices are not my responsibility. But you could help us. You could stop the lawsuit, help us keep the house. We're family. You stopped being family the moment you decided to try to destroy my independence. Family doesn't manipulate each other. Family doesn't lie to doctors and lawyers to try to gain control of each other's lives." Sarah's composure finally cracked. "You're a vindictive old woman who cares more about money than your own grandchildren. I'm a woman who worked for 40 years to build financial security, and I'm not going to let that security be destroyed by people who see me as nothing more than a source of funding for their irresponsible choices." After Sarah left, I called Harold to report the violation of the restraining order. "She's getting desperate," he said. "Desperate people make increasingly poor decisions. What's our next step?" "We wait for them to make more mistakes, and we document everything. Their own actions are building our case better than we ever could." That evening, I sat in my living room looking at family photos that lined the mantelpiece. Pictures of Michael as a child, graduation photos, wedding pictures with Sarah, images of my grandchildren. I felt a deep sadness for what we had lost, but no regret about the path I had chosen. They had forced this confrontation by trying to steal my independence. Now they would learn exactly what happened when you declared war on someone with my resources, connections, and determination. The education was just beginning. Friday morning brought an escalation that even I hadn't anticipated. Margaret called at 7:30 with news that Michael and Sarah had made a decision that would prove to be their final and most devastating mistake. "Amelia, they've hired a new lawyer, Thomas Brennan. He's known for taking cases that other attorneys won't touch, and he's filed an emergency motion claiming you're mentally unstable and pose a danger to yourself and others. Based on what evidence? They're claiming that your refusal to accept their help, your hostility toward family members, and your vindictive pursuit of legal action against them demonstrates paranoid delusions and cognitive impairment. Brennan is arguing that you need immediate psychiatric evaluation and protective custody. The strategy was breathtakingly desperate and fundamentally flawed. They were essentially arguing that my competent defense of myself proved I was incompetent. But it was also dangerous because emergency psychiatric holds could sometimes be granted based on minimal evidence if the right pressure was applied to the right judge. Harold arrived within the hour, and his expression was grimmer than I had ever seen it. "Amelia, they've escalated this to a level that could have serious consequences. Brennan has requested an emergency hearing for Monday morning, and he's asking for temporary custody pending psychiatric evaluation. Can they do that?" Under normal circumstances, no. But Brennan is arguing that your pursuit of legal action against your own family demonstrates a break from reality. He's claiming that a rational person would accept their children's help gracefully, not respond with lawsuits and restraining orders. So my competent defense of myself is being used as evidence of incompetency? Exactly. It's a legal catch-22. If you accept their manipulation, you're incompetent because you can't recognize exploitation. If you fight back, you're incompetent because you're being hostile to family members who are trying to help. I felt the familiar surge of courtroom energy that had sustained me through 4 decades of legal battles. Harold, they've just made a tactical error that's going to destroy them completely. How so? Because now they're not just trying to steal my assets, they're trying to have me committed to a psychiatric facility. That's not civil elder abuse anymore. That's criminal conspiracy, false imprisonment, and violation of civil rights under federal law. Harold's expression began to brighten as he understood my strategy. You want to escalate this to federal court. I want to destroy them so completely that no one will ever try this again. Not just Michael and Sarah, but Thomas Brennan and every other predator who thinks elderly people are easy targets. Over the weekend, we assembled a legal response that was comprehensive, devastating, and designed to expose not just their greed, but their complete disregard for basic human decency. Dr. Webb prepared an expanded psychiatric evaluation documenting not just my mental competency, but my emotional stability and sound judgment. Jonathan Pierce assembled additional financial records showing the sophisticated investment strategies I had employed successfully for decades. Margaret compiled a complete dossier of their financial desperation and the timeline of their escalating attempts to gain control of my assets. But the most powerful weapon in our arsenal was something they had given us themselves, a complete record of their own words and actions that demonstrated premeditated conspiracy. Monday morning's hearing was held in the same courtroom where Judge Morrison had demolished their first guardianship attempt. This time, however, the stakes were much higher and their desperation was palpable. Thomas Brennan was everything Margaret had described: smooth, aggressive, and completely without scruples. He approached the bench with the confidence of someone who had successfully manipulated the system many times before. "Your Honor," Brennan began, "we're here today because Mrs. Amelia Rockwell has demonstrated increasingly erratic and vindictive behavior that suggests serious mental instability. Her response to her family's reasonable concerns has been to file frivolous lawsuits, obtain restraining orders, and pursue criminal charges against her own son and daughter-in-law." Brennan painted a picture of a paranoid elderly woman who had become so delusional that she interpreted loving concern as criminal conspiracy. Her family's attempts to ensure her safety have been met with hostility, legal threats, and accusations of elder abuse. This is not the behavior of a rational person, Your Honor. This is the behavior of someone who needs immediate psychiatric intervention. When Harold stood to respond, I could see the controlled fury in his expression. "Your Honor, what we're witnessing today is the final desperate attempt of individuals who have been caught committing elder abuse to turn their victim into the perpetrator." Harold systematically dismantled their argument. He presented the audio recordings of Michael and Sarah revealing their premeditated plan to gain control of my assets. He showed their financial records, documenting their desperation and timeline of debt. He demonstrated that every action they had taken was motivated by greed, not concern. "Your Honor," Harold said, "the petitioners are arguing that Mrs. Rockwell's competent defense of herself proves she's incompetent. They're claiming that her refusal to be victimized demonstrates mental illness. This is not just legally absurd, it's morally reprehensible." Then came the moment I had been waiting for. Judge Morrison called me to testify about my mental state and the reasons for my legal actions against my family. I approached the witness stand with 40 years of courtroom experience behind me and looked directly at Michael and Sarah as I spoke. "Your Honor, I am pursuing legal action against my son and daughter-in-law because they conspired to have me declared incompetent so they could steal my life's work to pay their gambling debts. They researched guardianship procedures, contacted assisted living facilities, and retained an attorney to help them gain control of my assets before they ever expressed any concern about my well-being. I detailed their systematic campaign of manipulation, their lies to medical professionals, their attempts to isolate me from my support network, and their threats to use legal force if I didn't comply with their demands. Your Honor, I concluded, if defending myself from exploitation is evidence of mental illness, then every competent person who refuses to be victimized would be declared insane. My actions are not vindictive, they are protective. I am protecting not just myself, but every other elderly person who might become a target for this kind of predatory behavior. Judge Morrison asked me several additional questions, each designed to test my reasoning, judgment, and emotional stability. I answered each one clearly and comprehensively, demonstrating not just competency, but exceptional clarity of thought and purpose. When Michael was called to testify, his performance was even more devastating than it had been the previous week. Under Harold's cross-examination, he was forced to admit that his family's concern for my well-being had begun exactly when their financial situation became desperate. Mr. Rockwell, Harold asked, do you believe your mother has the right to refuse your help? Well, yes, but when someone isn't thinking clearly, are you qualified to determine whether someone is thinking clearly? I'm her son. I know her better than anyone. You're also someone who owes $40,000 to loan sharks and is facing foreclosure on your home. Does that financial pressure affect your judgment about your mother's competency? Michael had no answer that wouldn't damn him further. When all testimony was complete, Judge Morrison's ruling was swift and absolute. This court finds that Mrs. Amelia Rockwell is not only completely competent, but has demonstrated exceptional clarity and sound judgment in protecting herself from what can only be described as predatory behavior by her own family members. She turned to face Michael, Sarah, and Thomas Brennan directly. Furthermore, this court is appalled by the attempt to use psychiatric commitment as a weapon against an elderly woman who has successfully defended herself from exploitation. This represents an abuse of the legal system that this court will not tolerate. Judge Morrison not only denied their petition, but issued sanctions against Thomas Brennan for filing frivolous motions and referred his conduct to the state bar for disciplinary action. As I left the courthouse that morning, walking past Michael and Sarah, who looked completely broken, I realized that they had finally learned the lesson I had been trying to teach them. When you try to destroy Amelia Rockwell, you better be prepared for the consequences. Because I don't just defend myself, I make sure the attack never happens again. The week following Judge Morrison's decisive ruling brought a cascade of consequences that demonstrated the full scope of what Michael and Sarah had unleashed when they decided to target me. Tuesday morning, Harold called with news that the district attorney's office had filed formal elder abuse charges against both Michael and Sarah. The DA says it's one of the clearest cases of attempted financial exploitation she's seen. The premeditation, the conspiracy, the systematic deception, it's all documented. What are they facing? Felony elder abuse, conspiracy to commit fraud, and attempted theft by deception. If convicted, they're looking at significant prison time and restitution. Wednesday brought even more satisfying news. Margaret reported that Michael's employer had terminated him after learning about the criminal charges and his gambling debts. Apparently, his company has a zero-tolerance policy for employees involved in financial crimes. His reputation in the marketing industry is finished, but the consequences extended beyond just Michael and Sarah. Thomas Brennan's attempt to have me psychiatrically committed had triggered a state bar investigation that uncovered a pattern of similar cases where he had helped families exploit elderly relatives. Brennan is facing disbarment, Harold told me Thursday morning. The Bar Association found evidence that he's been running what amounts to a legal elder abuse operation, helping desperate families manipulate the guardianship system for financial gain. Richard Blackwood, their original attorney, had already been suspended pending investigation. The entire network of predators who specialized in exploiting elderly people was being exposed and dismantled. Thursday afternoon brought a visitor I had been expecting. Michael appeared at my door looking haggard, desperate, and completely defeated. The confident man who had casually announced his plan to sell my car was gone, replaced by someone who finally understood the magnitude of what he had lost. Mom, please, we need to talk. Michael, you're in violation of the restraining order. I know, but I'm begging you. Please just listen to me for 5 minutes. Against my better judgment, I led him into my living room. He sat on the edge of the couch where just 3 weeks earlier he had outlined his plan to control my life, and now he was completely broken. Mom, I know we made mistakes. I know we went about everything the wrong way, but we're facing prison time and Sarah is talking about leaving me and taking the kids. You didn't make mistakes, Michael. You made choices. You chose to lie to medical professionals about my competency. You chose to conspire with lawyers to have me declared incompetent. You chose to research ways to have me institutionalized so you could steal my assets. It wasn't supposed to be stealing. We thought you would be better off with professional care and the money would be better managed. Michael, stop lying. Even now, when you're facing the consequences of your actions, you're still lying. You never cared about my well-being. You only cared about solving your financial problems with my money. He buried his face in his hands. What do you want me to say? Yes, we needed the money. Yes, we were desperate. But you're our family, and family is supposed to help each other. Family is supposed to love and respect each other. Family doesn't manipulate each other or try to destroy each other's independence. You stopped being my family the moment you decided to treat me like an obstacle to your financial recovery. Is there anything I can do? Anything that would make you consider dropping the charges? I looked at this man I had raised, educated, and loved unconditionally for 36 years. The little boy who used to run to me when he was scared. The young man I had been so proud to see graduate college. The son I had thought would be my companion and support in my later years. Michael, you can start by acknowledging the truth about what you did. Not that you made mistakes or went about things the wrong way. Acknowledge that you conspired to have your mother declared incompetent so you could steal her life's work to pay your gambling debts. I can't do that. It sounds so criminal. That's because it was criminal, Michael. And until you can acknowledge that truth, there's nothing to discuss. He left without saying another word, and I knew it would be the last conversation we would ever have as mother and son. Friday brought the final piece of justice I had been waiting for. Margaret called with news that Sarah had been arrested trying to use forged documents to access my bank accounts. Apparently, she had fake power of attorney papers and was trying to convince a different branch manager that she had authority to access your accounts for a family emergency. The bank's security flagged the documents immediately. How did she think she could get away with that? Desperation makes people stupid. She's now facing additional charges for forgery and attempted bank fraud. The following Monday, Harold presented me with a settlement offer from their new attorney, a legitimate lawyer who was apparently horrified by what his clients had attempted. They're offering to plead guilty to reduced charges in exchange for you dropping the civil lawsuit. They'll accept probation, community service, and agree to never contact you again. What about restitution? They'll pay your legal costs and agree to a permanent restraining order. But Amelia, they don't have any assets left to pay significant damages. The house is in foreclosure. Michael lost his job, and they've borrowed against everything they owned. I considered the offer carefully. Financial restitution wasn't what I wanted from this situation. I wanted something much more valuable, the knowledge that they would never again target an elderly person for exploitation. Accept the plea agreement, I told Harold, but I want the criminal charges to remain on their records permanently. I want every background check, every job application, every rental application to show that they were convicted of elder abuse. That's going to make rebuilding their lives very difficult. Good. Maybe other potential victims will be protected because employers and landlords will know what they're capable of. The final hearing was held on a cold Tuesday morning in late November. Michael and Sarah pled guilty to reduced charges of attempted elder abuse and conspiracy to commit fraud. They were sentenced to 2 years probation, 500 hours of community service, and permanent restraining orders prohibiting them from contacting me. As they left the courthouse that day, they looked like completely different people than the confident couple who had sat in my dining room 6 weeks earlier, explaining how they planned to manage my life. They were broken, unemployed, homeless, and facing a future where their criminal records would follow them everywhere. Judge Morrison addressed them directly during sentencing. You targeted your own family member for financial exploitation. You attempted to use the legal system to steal an elderly woman's independence and life's work. The fact that your victim was intelligent and resourceful enough to defend herself doesn't diminish the seriousness of what you attempted. After the hearing, Harold and I stood on the courthouse steps in the crisp autumn air. "How do you feel?" he asked. "I feel like justice was served," I said. "Not just for me, but for every elderly person who might have become their next target." "Any regrets?" I thought about Michael as a little boy, about the family dinners and birthday celebrations, about the grandchildren I would probably never see again. I regret that it came to this, but I don't regret defending myself, and I don't regret making sure they faced consequences for their actions. As I drove home that afternoon, in my own car, to my own house, using my own money, I felt a deep satisfaction that had nothing to do with revenge and everything to do with protection. Michael and Sarah had learned that elderly people are not helpless victims waiting to be exploited. Some of us have resources, connections, and the determination to fight back. And when we fight back, we don't just protect ourselves. We protect everyone who comes after us. 6 months have passed since that final hearing, and as I sit in my home office on this peaceful spring morning, I can reflect on everything that transpired with a clarity that only comes with time and resolution. My house is quiet, but not lonely. The silence is the sound of independence preserved, of dignity defended, of a life reclaimed from those who would have stripped it away. Every morning when I wake up in my own bed, in my own home, I'm reminded of what I almost lost and what I fought to keep. The legal consequences for Michael and Sarah extended far beyond what happened in that courtroom. Michael's conviction for elder abuse made him unemployable in his field. No marketing firm would hire someone with a criminal record for financial exploitation. Sarah's attempts at finding work were similarly unsuccessful. Their criminal records followed them everywhere: rental applications, job interviews, even volunteer opportunities. They lost their house to foreclosure 3 weeks after the final hearing. Margaret's investigation revealed that they moved to a small apartment across town, living on whatever odd jobs Michael could find, and the assistance of Sarah's parents, who were reportedly horrified by what their daughter had attempted. The children, my grandchildren Emma and James, were the innocent victims in all of this. They had to change schools, leave their friends, and adjust to a dramatically reduced standard of living. I felt genuine sadness for them, but not enough to regret the path I had chosen. Their parents' choices had consequences, and unfortunately, those consequences affected the entire family. Eleanor Martinez stopped by last week with news she thought I should know. "I saw Sarah at the grocery store," she said over coffee in my kitchen. She looked exhausted, worn down. When she saw me, she started to approach, but then changed her mind and walked away. "How did that make you feel?" I asked. "Honestly, satisfied. Not in a vindictive way, but in the way you feel when justice has been served." She learned that actions have consequences. Dr. Webb continues to be my physician, and at my last appointment, she mentioned how my case had affected her practice. "I've implemented new protocols for family members who contact our office asking about patients. Your situation taught me how predators use medical professionals as part of their strategy to undermine elderly people's independence." Jonathan Pierce, my financial advisor, had a similar experience. "We've completely revamped our security procedures because of what happened to you. No family member can access information about a client's accounts without written authorization and verification procedures. Your case is being used as a training example throughout our industry." Harold Patterson remains one of my closest friends and advisors. "Amelia," he told me recently, "your case has become a textbook example of how elderly people can protect themselves from family exploitation. I've presented it at 3 legal conferences, and it's being studied by elder law attorneys across the state. But perhaps the most satisfying outcome has been the broader impact on the predatory network that had targeted me." Richard Blackwood was permanently disbarred and is facing criminal charges in connection with 7 other questionable guardianship cases. Thomas Brennan lost his license and is being investigated by federal authorities for civil rights violations. The assisted living facility that Sarah had contacted implemented new policies requiring multiple family member consent and independent advocacy before accepting residents whose placements are arranged by relatives. The car dealership that had sent an appraiser to my house now requires written authorization from vehicle owners before providing any information to family members. 3 months ago, I received a letter that surprised me. It was from a woman named Patricia Coleman, a 70-year-old retired teacher whose daughter and son-in-law had attempted to gain control of her finances using tactics similar to what Michael and Sarah had tried with me. Mrs. Rockwell, her letter read, your case gave me the courage to fight back against my own family's attempts to manipulate me. I hired an attorney, documented their behavior, and successfully defended my independence. Thank you for showing elderly people that we don't have to be victims. I've received dozens of similar letters. Women and men whose families tried to exploit them, who found the strength to resist because they knew someone else had successfully fought back. These letters are more valuable to me than any financial settlement could have been. My daily life has returned to the rhythm I had established before this ordeal began. I drive my BMW wherever I want to go. I manage my own investments with Jonathan's advice. I maintain my own home with the help of trusted professionals. I make my own decisions about my money, my time, and my life. But I'm not the same person I was 6 months ago. The experience taught me things about myself that I hadn't fully understood. Even after 40 years of legal practice, I learned that the skills that made me successful in courtrooms and boardrooms were not diminished by retirement. I learned that predators often mistake age for weakness, and that mistake can be fatal to their plans. Most importantly, I learned that family relationships built on manipulation and exploitation are not worth preserving. Real family supports your independence and respects your autonomy. Real family asks for help honestly rather than trying to steal what they need. Real family celebrates your strength rather than trying to undermine it. I think about Michael sometimes, usually when I'm looking at old photographs or when something reminds me of the child he used to be. I feel sadness for what we lost, but no regret for the choices I made. He forced me to choose between being a victim and being a survivor, and I chose survival. The house is quiet now, but it's filled with the peace that comes from knowing you fought for what mattered and won. Every room represents a choice I made, a life I built, a future I protected. The dining room where they tried to manipulate me is now the place where I have dinner with friends who respect and value me. The office where I planned my defense is where I continue to manage my affairs with competence and confidence. As I finish writing this account of what happened to me, I want every person who reads it to understand one crucial truth. Elderly people are not automatic victims. We have resources, experience, and often the time and determination to fight back against those who would exploit us. Age brings wisdom, not weakness. Experience teaches strategy, not surrender. And sometimes, the people who try to destroy us discover that they've chosen the wrong target. I am Amelia Rockwell. I am 63 years old, completely independent, and living proof that when someone tries to steal your life, you have the power to take it back. The lesson Michael and Sarah learned is one I hope others will remember. Never underestimate a woman who has spent 40 years winning battles that mattered. We know how to fight, we know how to win, and we never forget the importance of making sure the victory protects not just ourselves, but everyone who comes after us. My car is in the driveway. My house is in my name. My money is under my control. My life is my own, and that in the end is the only victory that truly matters.